Welcome to South Asia Monitor Conversation, Uday. It's always a great pleasure.
Thank you, Mayank. As always, as I said, I look forward to having these unhurried conversations with you.
Yeah. This morning, which is my morning, your evening on May 20th, I want to talk to you about a rather mystifying development out of Islamabad, where Pakistan's Prime Minister has announced that the Pakistani Army Chief General Asim Munir has been elevated to Field Marshal. And I'm quoting the Prime Minister in specific terms. He says, in recognition of the strategic brilliance and courageous leadership that ensured national security and decisively defeated the enemy, unquote. It's almost as if a massive cloud of delusion is hanging over Pakistan. What defeat and what courageous leadership are we talking about?
You use the word mystifying, Mayank,
Yeah,
to introduce the announcement that General Munir will now be elevated to Field Marshal. And as a security analyst and as a student of Pakistan's own internal dynamic for almost 30 years, I would say that, you know, this is not surprising. It may be mystifying to some of us on the outside, but if one were to contextualize the sequence of events in Pakistan over the last few months, and particularly in the post Operation Sindoor context, I think the narrative in Pakistan is that Pakistan has been able to stand up to India. And if you see the subtext of all the briefings that were done by the Pakistani military and their Director General of Public Relations, it is that they were able to not only resist India, but also give a very firm riposte, a very firm military kind of response, which had pushed India on the back foot. This, as I said, is their narrative. Now, clearly, they are buying into it. When I say they, I mean the political establishment, because this is not just a case of recognizing strategic brilliance of the army chief and elevating him to field marshal, which, by the way, for the record, the last time it happened was 1959, if I remember right.
65.
And then, was it 65 or 59
Yeah.
when Ayub Khan
No,
elevated
I think it was 65 when Ayub Khan himself elevated himself
So
to.
he becomes the army chief who elevates himself to field marshal at that time. So it's almost 60 years plus, and in that sense, I think it is a case of the Pakistani political establishment as represented by the Sharif brothers, which is Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, and in many ways the power behind the party at the moment, which is the senior Sharif, former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, have clearly got into a kind of an understanding with not only the army chief, but perhaps also with the PPP represented by the president, Mr. Zardari. And in a way, this is my conjecture, I don't have a smoking gun, but to quarantine, prevent Mr. Imran Khan from being able to make any political inroads. And that, to my mind, is the broad context in which I think one can rationalize or explain how General Munir is being elevated to the rank of Field Marshal. And what it means for Pakistan, of course, I think we can discuss as we go along. But what is your own take, Mayank, sitting where you are, the wise man from Cincinnati, Ohio, wherever you are?
Chicago. No, in fact, I was thinking that in purely crass, cynical terms, Shahbaz Sharif is really laying it on thick. It's a political move in some sense because he needs the army chief on his side all the time. And as you very astutely pointed out, that perhaps one of the considerations is that they want to keep Imran Khan still at bay. So the Sharifs have basically got together to keep the army chief in good humor. I think you are onto something there. But I find it strange. What do you mean? What does field marshal really mean in operative effective terms? Nothing really. It's what maybe you'll get some more privileges, more salutes. What exactly does it mean as a
No,
as a
see, in a purely technical sense, I would say that in terms of military protocol, a general in the Pakistani army, currently General Munir, is what is referred to as a four-star general. The lieutenant generals below him, the corps commanders, are three-star. He is four-star as chief of the army staff. Now he'll become five-star. So a field marshal is the equivalent of a five-star general elevated to the rank is that of a field marshal. And one of the stipulations is that field marshals never retire. You are a field marshal for life.
Right.
Now, does it also mean that in the current case, General Munir, now soon to become Field Marshal Munir, will be the army chief for life? That is a question mark. Because even now in the Pakistani army, when there was talk about General Munir getting an extension as the army chief, even without the reference to the rank of field marshal, one hears that there was a lot of discord and disquiet because the number of people who are waiting to be promoted would have to retire before they are even looked at for the next rank. So the immediate rung after General Munir, who would have been normally considered for the army chief's post, are clearly dissatisfied. Were he to become field marshal for life and army chief for life, then my sense is that within the army there are factions. There is one group that is loyal to General Munir, who represents the equivalent of the Islamist leaning part of the officer corps, officer cadre of the Pakistani army, whose lineage goes back to General Ziaul Haq, who also was a very, very sort of conservative in terms of his practice of religion and applying it to the army. But there are others who do not necessarily share this persuasion. And therefore, I expect that there would be murmurs and perhaps even more than murmurs, and General Munir would have to deal with it. But he will be in an advantageous position because he has the backing of the current political dispensation. That is the Sharif brothers and the president, Mr. Zardari, who represents the PPP. So in that sense, he has an advantage. But let's not forget, Mayank, that during his tenure as army chief, you'll recall, for the first time in the history of Pakistan, the citizens of Pakistan who were very unhappy, particularly those who were Imran Khan supporters, had ransacked the house of the corps commander.
Right.
Never happened before. And Pakistan had to take some emergency measures to restore the equivalent of some semblance of order. Subsequently, there have been other setbacks, including the train hijack, which had put General Munir again on the back foot in terms of internal security. So when you look at this entire thing in a holistic sense, I don't think it will be such a smooth ride, for General Munir, soon to be Field Marshal Munir, when he assumes office, because there will be a number of internal challenges. Mine?
Yeah. To understand a little more, you pointed out that field marshal is for life. Does it mean that an army chief is also for life? Now, can there be a situation where he can remain field marshal for life, but there can be a new army chief at some point?
That's a tricky question in Pakistan, because we know from previous experience that if you hand over the post of chief of the army staff, that's where real power lies. And in the event General Munir, Field Marshal Munir, decides that he would step down as the army chief and remain Field Marshal, but what would be his locus?
Right.
Meaning that there is a prime minister, a civilian prime minister, there is a president, there is an army chief. What does the field marshal do if he does not have an army at his command? So that would be a very anomalous situation in Pakistan, and even General Musharraf realized this, that one of the reasons why he continued to remain army chief even though he was president was because true power in Pakistan comes from sitting in that particular chair, that of the army chief. Then you have not only the loyalty, but you have the confidence that the corps commanders cannot buck you. That is, the Rawalpindi is the GHQ, and the corps commanders represent the true power. And if they know that there is the army chief sitting right on top of them, they will not do anything to rock the boat, as it were. So that is my sense, that the field marshal without the army command would be anomalous.
Uday, I was thinking politically, I understand that it's expedient for the Sharif to spin this as a sort of a triumph in its conflict with India. But I'm sure internally, even Field Marshal Munir now understands that the situation was nowhere close to being as sanguine as they publicly pretended it to be. What's your reading in terms of internally what they are thinking? Because by all accounts, India has given them quite a walloping in a significant sense, although in a precise sense. And we have taken some beating, I suppose, as well, because sitting afar here in Chicago, it's hard for me to assess. You are there. What's your take on
You
who
know,
has suffered how much?
based on all the information in the public domain, I would say that tactically India was able to send a very strong message. The very fact that you could reach Punjab, we are
Right.
talking about sites like Muridke and Bahawalpur, which is in the heart of Punjab, I think has sent a very strong signal that India's tactical ability to strike has been demonstrated. And Pakistan's own offensive against India, when they decided to target military assets all the way from Gujarat to Srinagar, were in a way pushed back. India's air defenses blunted the Pakistani attack. So, just if you take these two indicators and the fact that India's long range missiles like the BrahMos were very effective, India's air defense was very effective. And perhaps there are some question marks now about India's own ability in terms of the first few hours, in terms of the aerial platforms. That needs to be addressed as and when I think more information is available. But in totality, I think India's tactical advantage was there, it was established, and the signals were sent to Pakistan. And the internal situation in Pakistan, my own reading is that it is very, very fragile. And the reason I'm saying this is that apart from whatever may have happened on the military front, the IMF loan is a good indicator. If you recall, during Operation Sindoor, Pakistan was waiting very, very anxiously, with bated breath almost, to make sure that the IMF approved the loan. Now, there are other reasons that because of China and the United States and their uncritical support, if you will, for Pakistan and Pakistan's complicity in terrorism, the IMF loan was approved. It was only then that Pakistan could really heave a sigh of relief. So, for a country that is so dependent on an emergency loan of a few $1 billion, is indicative of the internal fragility. And compounded, if you look at the three main strands for any nation state, the military capability, the economic capability, and the political credibility. On all three fronts, I would say that Pakistan is in a vulnerable area. So, taken together, I would say that currently Pakistan would need to do a lot of internal rewiring to regain whatever kind of resilience it is seeking in dealing with numerous challenges, including the one that it has now provoked with India.
You know,
We haven't even spoken about the Indus water, by the way.
to to me that begs the question: then what is this triumphalism about? I mean, it's almost delusional. Even if they manage to stand up a little bit, which they might as well have, the notion that the leadership of General Munir was so spectacular and courageous that he has been elevated to field marshal. I'm trying to make some rational sense out of it, other than just basically taking.
On this actually is very interesting to try and see this in terms of the strategic culture of the Pakistani military as an institution. Every major military comes with its own strategic culture. And if you look at the long cycle of history, recent history, the last 100 years, it's a bit like saying that the Soviet army had its own distinctive culture that was distilled over two great wars, World War One, World War Two. You could say the same thing about Germany, the German military, the way it evolved, or you could talk about the Royal Navy, Britain, or you could talk about the United States and the US military, whether it is the Marines or the US Navy or the US Army. And each of them have internalized experiences. Since you're sitting in Chicago, let me take the liberty of saying that perhaps the US Army, the US military, has internalized both Vietnam and Afghanistan. It has left its own impress in terms of strategic culture. Like that, the Pakistan army, I think, has internalized its own experiences. And one of the strands is this delusional kind of thinking and the narratives that they build and start believing. Now, I don't want to use too much of jargon, but in critical theory, we talk about the simulacrum.
Yeah,
You
sure.
create a bubble,
Yeah.
make believe, and you enter that bubble to such a degree that the make believe becomes more real than reality. This is all the stuff that Baudrillard, etc., talk about.
Right.
I'm trying to extrapolate that to the current situation and tentatively make the suggestion that this is a military that believed that after 1971, the humiliation and the loss of Bangladesh, East Pakistan becomes Bangladesh, that they had resisted India. There are chapter and verse to say that they were not defeated. But for the fact that the Americans let them down, they would have won. That is 71. More recently, Pakistan was led to believe that Osama bin Laden did not reside in Pakistan near Abbottabad. I mean, General Musharraf himself went to great length to say that he knew nothing about Osama bin Laden. We had the Mumbai attack. For days on end, Pakistan refused to accept that the terrorists had come from Pakistan. Till, to the credit of the Pakistani media, I always say that we must acknowledge that the professional integrity of the Pakistani media was on display in 2008 when Mumbai happened. That it was a Pakistani journalist who revealed the identity of Kasab. Otherwise, till then, Pakistan believed that they had no hand in Mumbai. So what I'm trying to get at is to say that they have internalized this kind of simulacrum, believing these delusional narratives. So I'm proposing that the way in which the rationale or the reason for elevating General Munir to Field Marshal is about strategic brilliance. That's very, very debatable. But I'm sure there would be enough people within Pakistan who would perhaps critique this in a more informed way as to what were the compulsions for them to create this new simulacrum, if I may say that, about General Munir, Operation Sindhu, and the strategic brilliance that he brought to the table. Maya?
In terms of what it does to him, about his flexibility to wage future wars with India, do you think it has any meaning to it that he's a five-star general, not a four-star general? Because at the end
Not
of
at
the
all.
day, he's still heading the same military machine, right?
No, no. I'm sorry for replying so quickly, but I would say not at all. And the reason I'm saying that is Pakistan's ability to engage in a conventional war with India would depend on the assets that they have,
Right.
the kind of tangible military assets they have, the kind of assistance they are likely to get from quote unquote nations friendly to Pakistan. In this case, in Operation Sindoor, we saw a few countries that went out of their way to provide tangible military support to Pakistan, as in the case of Turkey. There are reports of Iran also, United States, China in different ways. So that is the second factor. Pakistan's ability to engage with India militarily will be predicated on these two
Right.
tangible indicators. Whether the army chief is 4-star or 5-star, to my mind, would not be that relevant. But you can see there's a clique forming in Pakistan around General Munir because Air Marshal Sidhu has also been given an extension.
Right.
That is open ended. Now we are aware that air power and the way in which technology is now enabling air power is an important determinant for military capabilities across the world now, whether it's Ukraine or West Asia or what is happening in South Asia. So I thought that was also an interesting indicator that not only has General Munir got an elevation to Field Marshal, but the Air Chief is also getting an extension. And again, there are lots of, I would say, narratives about the Air Chief and his own track record, which doesn't appear to be as shining as is often made out to be.
To wrap up, just the last couple of things. One is I want to be a bit facetious with you. What happens when, in the aftermath of General Munir's elevation, when he meets his Indian vis-a-vis, the army chief? Is there going to be any difference in the way they approach each other?
I don't think so, because first of all, there is no interaction between the Indian army chief and the Pakistani army chief.
No, if
None
there
at all.
ever is, I'm saying if it's a sort of a hypothetical situation.
I mean, as I said, I see this as a low probability, but purely in terms of protocol, yes, the Indian army chief is 4-star. And if there is ever such an exigency, I think the Pakistani army chief, one presumes that Field Marshal Munir will continue as the army chief, that there would be that kind of military, contrast. One is 4-star and the other is 5-star, but only to that extent.
To conclude, where do you think this is going now? Now that ceasefire seems to be holding in some significant ways, where are we headed now in terms of any kind of resolution of the issues at hand?
At the moment, as you said, the ceasefire is in place, but to my mind, it's an uneasy ceasefire. And you'll recall that from the Indian side, Prime Minister Modi had made this point that this is only a pause, that Operation Sindoor has not concluded. So that is a signal that there are options that are being kept open, and India has also drawn certain red lines about how it will deal with any provocation. So my sense is that after the elevation of General Munir to Field Marshal, perhaps there'll be an internal consolidation within Pakistan, because Pakistan's politics are also in a state of considerable flux. I don't think Mr. Imran Khan is out of the ring. He may be in prison, but from whatever little bit one gathers from social media and anecdotally, I think there are large sections of Pakistan's own demography that are very unhappy, number one, with the army, number two, with the two major parties, the PML and the PPP, for having made their own, again, strong word to use, Faustian bargain with Rawalpindi. Because the PTI and Mr. Imran Khan, the agenda there was to remove the army from the calculus of power in Pakistan, and perhaps that was too much for the army to accept. But I think that story is not over. So my sense is that there would be some internal consolidation. And don't forget Balochistan. Balochistan is a very important domestic, I would say, challenge
Right.
for the establishment in Pakistan. At the moment, they are dormant. But there are various, as I said, exigencies that could unfold. All of these would demand the attention of the Pakistani state and its power grid in a very focused way, for which they need to have their economic and fiscal resilience in place. So, if you want to see where Pakistan is going, track the Pakistani rupee in relation to the US dollar. That would give a good indicator about the fragility we are talking about. Right?
On that note, Uday, I want to thank you. I know most of the talking was done by you because I defer to you when it comes to military matters. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. But I remain mystified at this rather symbolic move that Islamabad has moved. I see it as really the Sharifs laying it on thick politically for their own survival, as well as just to essentially take the Pakistani public down the garden path about the situation being far more sanguine than it is. So that's how I see it, and I don't know if it has any practical value eventually for Pakistan as a country.
But let's wait and watch, and I'm sure both of us can come back and compare notes again at
Indeed,
some point in the near future.
indeed.